In the year 2049, the Chinese Communist Party will extinguish hundreds of candles. But it won't be just a celebration. It will be an appointment with history. A century earlier, in 1949, China emerged from centuries of chaos, wars, and fractures. It declared its new republic, vowing never to be a weak nation again. And from that day, the countdown began. 100 years of work, planning, and waiting. 100 years to build a strategy designed to return China to the top. The plan has a name, China's Vision 2049. And its goal is simple in words, dangerous in meaning. To become the world's #1 superpower, economically, militarily, and technologically. Since Xi Jinping took power in 2012, that goal transformed from an ideal into a state project known as the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. A rise not merely out of poverty, but a redesign of the global order. Inside the country, China is restructuring its society, linking citizens to the state, loyalty to the party, ambition to a collective future. Outside, it builds bridges across continents, from African ports to European railways, from the South China Sea to the Arctic. A project unlike anything in the 21st century, combining socialist governance with digital control, national pride with economic pragmatism. But as 2049 approaches, anxiety grows in Western capitals. Are we witnessing a Chinese renaissance or the birth of a new world order from the East? Washington sees 2049 as the hour of danger. Europe fears a silent economic domination, but China sees it as a moment of salvation. The moment when the center of the world returns to its natural place. 2049 is not just a date. It is the year when Beijing plans to say, the world has changed, and this time we will not stand on the margins. Half a century ago, China lived in the shadows. Millions of peasants, a closed economy, a collapsing infrastructure. No one imagined it would one day become the factory of the world. In the 1970s came a man named Deng Xiaoping, not a general, but an engineer of transformation. He opened the doors to the economy and allowed capital to breathe under the roof of the Communist Party. It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, Deng said. What matters is that it catches mice. From that day, Chinese cats began catching the world. Villages turned into factories, factories into megacities. And then came the new century, bringing the explosion, the longest bridges, the fastest trains, the largest ports. In less than one generation, more than 800 million people were lifted out of poverty, a record unmatched anywhere on Earth. But wealth was not the final goal. The real objective was control over the trajectory of history. Since the year 2000, Beijing began laying the foundations for Vision 2049, a precisely guided economy, continuous growth, and infrastructure designed to serve politics. Then came Xi Jinping to transform the dream into a state doctrine. His slogan, a strong nation at home, influential abroad, connected to the future. Xi's plan stands on 3 pillars: political stability under party rule, technology-driven economic growth, and national identity as a unifying force. China no longer exports clothes, It exports satellites. It no longer searches for markets, it builds them. While the West spends time in crises and hesitant democracies, Beijing writes the script of a new world. One country, one party, one goal. To evolve from a rising power to a power impossible to bypass. In a world where strength is measured in code, not cannons, China understands that controlling the future means controlling technology. In 2015, Beijing announced Made in China 2025, a declaration of technological war on the West. The goal, complete self-reliance, from microchips to AI, from satellites to robotics. Companies like Huawei, Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba became digital armies serving the state, collecting data, building algorithms, and designing a digital ecosystem independent from Silicon Valley. In cities like Shenzhen and Hangzhou, smart city experiments run on AI, with cameras on every corner, social credit scoring, and a fully interconnected society. A surveillance network unprecedented in scale. The West calls it control. China calls it the governance of the future. In 2022, China surpassed the United States in patents registrations. In 2024, it announced the first fully operational quantum computer. Not coincidence, milestones on the road to 2049. In space, China builds a new world, with the Tiangong orbital station as a permanent base and the Chang'e probe returning samples from the moon. The final target, Mars, before mid-century. But technology is also a battlefield. The chip war erupted between China and the United States. Washington restricts exports, sanctions companies, and closes markets. China responds quietly, building a domestic semiconductor industry and research centers working to produce a 100% Chinese chip. Meanwhile, China constructs what can be called the road of empire. In 2013, Xi Jinping stood in Kazakhstan and said, "Let us rebuild the Silk Road, but in our modern way." Thus was born the Belt and Road Initiative, the largest economic connectivity project in modern history, spanning over 140 countries. Not just ports and railroads, but China's pathway to the world and the world's pathway back to China. Officially, it is about development and trade, but in reality, it redraws the global map of power. Loans turn into leverage, infrastructure into influence. The West calls it debt trap diplomacy. China calls it development diplomacy. While the world watched the economy rise, another force grew in silence: the Chinese military. For 30 decades, China has built its army quietly. No noise, no fiery speeches, just factories, research centers, and expanding bases. Today, the PLA is no longer the army of a developing nation. It is the second largest military budget on Earth. In 2015, Xi announced full modernization by 2049 to create a military capable of fighting and winning any war. A message that shakes Washington. In the South China Sea, China builds islands from nothing, turns them into military bases, and creates new maritime borders enforced by power, not law. In the air, stealth fighters. At sea, the world's largest navy by number of ships, all under the banner of national rejuvenation. But behind the slogan lies the question: is China preparing for war? In Taiwan, the answer appears clear. To Beijing, the island is not a country, but a lost piece of the homeland. China surrounds it with planes and warships. The United States arms Taipei. The scene echoes the Cold War. But the next war will not be fought with bullets alone. It will be a war of brains, networks, and cyber dominance. Between 2030 and 2049, China plans to build a military capable of neutralizing any Asian opponent in days and competing globally with the US in a decade. By 2049, Xi wants his army ready to remind the world that Chinese century will not be defended with words, but with power. And now, the ultimate question. Who will rule the world then? Power in the 21st century is no longer measured by tanks or GDP size alone, but by the ability to plan long-term and to wait. And here, China excels. Since 1949, it has prepared for 2049, a century of quiet construction, steady rise, and unstoppable momentum. Today, the world beats to the rhythm of the Chinese rise. Its economy is the second largest, its army the largest in Asia, its artificial intelligence rivals American labs. But can the world accept Chinese leadership? In Washington, the answer is clear: no. So America surrounds China, alliances in the Pacific, chip wars, technological sanctions, new military bases. China responds differently, not with shouting, but with deals and expansion. While the US tightens its grip in the West, China extends its reach to the South, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Central Asia, building a global web of influence, invisible but everywhere, like a spider's web. If things go as planned, in 2049, China will be the center of global trade, the leader in clean technology, and a military power capable of defending its interests across continents. But history never moves in a straight line. China faces internal challenges, an aging population, slowing growth, rising living costs and inequality, and the silent fear that the great rejuvenation could become a great burden, that loyalty to the party could become a cage, that digital governance could become chains. Yet for Beijing, the price is acceptable, because China does not think in 5-year plans. It thinks in 50-year eras. 2049 is not the end. It is the beginning of a new chapter, where the East writes the rules of the game, where the dollar may no longer rule the markets, and democracy may no longer be the model the world imitates, but instead the rise of a new world with China at the center.